This is Caleb Owens with the Insurance Experience. Today, I'm with William Cox of the Insurance Adjusters Group. Hi, William. Thanks for joining me today on our podcast.
Hey, Caleb, how are you today?
I'm great. I'm great. Really nice weather today. I'm happy. It's a good day. So
Hi.
yeah. So William, I looked up. I heard about you. I'm really impressed that you're in Oklahoma. I don't know many people that want to be here, but made it to Oklahoma, and you're right in my backyard. So tell me more about yourself, William.
Well, I've really been doing this going on 15 years now. Um,
Well,
I had came from I had worked for Intel in the IT world, traveling around the United States and the Asia region, doing doing IT work for them. And I had a friend and a relative who had started up a public adjusting firm in Missouri, outside of St. Louis, and
wow.
they said, you should come on board. Blah, blah, blah. And I looked at it and I thought, well, it looks interesting. And, I'm good at project management and workflow and I can do that. So I kind of started building the office portion of it. And then I found out that it was just a lot more fun to go out and actually work a claim and deal with the adjusters and do that. So I did that with him for about 3 years, and then I kind of peeled off, started my own thing, and then found myself working, the tornado hail alley, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and
Right.
decided it'd probably be better to live here in Oklahoma City.
Huh.
So
Wow. So you come from a totally different background then. I mean, IT world, traveling all over, and then coming back here, right in the middle of the states, and settling into this public adjusting role. That's really quite a shift.
you'd be surprised. It was actually a pretty good fit because I
Huh.
think for most of us, managing the office part and the information and managing your files and doing all that, if you can get that kind of streamlined so you can devote more
Right.
time to dealing with the actual public adjusting stuff, it makes it a lot easier. So I found it a nice transition and kind of enjoyed not having to sit in the office all day.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, I think that especially now that there's a lot more technology that kind of, if you set it up right, like you're saying, it allows you to be able to just focus more on people, if you will. So you're actually getting out there and getting into the field and doing different things like that. And
Hmm.
as long as you enjoy it, that's great.
Yep, I do.
Excellent.
So that's kind of where I started, and it just kind of snowballed. And it's like anything else, that the more you do it, and the more knowledge you gather, and the better your library gets. The It seems like not only helps you, but it allows you to help other PAs that are starting out and need some help.
Yeah.
So
So tell me about that. What I mean, I know what a public adjuster is, but tell me about being a public adjuster. What is a public adjuster? How'd you kind of get started with that, and take me up that route?
well, like I said, I had a relative and a friend who started a PA firm and didn't really know anything about it. So kind of dived into that, go through the whole licensing thing to start with. And I think we all understand the licensing test has absolutely nothing to do with what you're going to actually do on a day to
Most
day
of the time, it's
basis.
the way.
But once you got into that and you started kind of learning it, and I think one of the best things that helped me, and still to this day does, is that first party property claims that they have every year.
Hmm.
Like that, there's PAs from all over the nation, a lot of good speakers. I pick up a lot of, because I think we get on our day to day, we kind of get in our own little bubble, and
Yeah.
you kind of get on a path of how you do things, or how you're dealing with certain issues. And when you get there, you hear how other people are doing it and see what they're doing and kind of get a different perspective. I think it helps expand, kind of expand how you're going to handle some of these claims into some areas that you might not have thought about before.
That's a conference. Tell me that again. What was it called?
First party property claims. I think it's NAPIA is one of the big sponsors of it.
Yeah.
And they have the East Coast, they've got the West Coast. I think they're working on trying to get something going in the Midwest. I know there's been a lot of talk about that. So
Okay. Wow. Okay, that's great. So you kind of go there and like you're saying, you get different ideas,
yeah,
kind of see different perspectives on things.
yeah, it's a 3 day conference. You get your, a lot of us have to do 24 CEs every 2 years for different states,
Right.
and you can get 24 CEs in 3 days. And
Wow.
um, you know, sometimes you get to watch Chip Merlin and Steve Badger go head to head on a little debate, and that's always interesting. Um, but I find just getting to talk to some of these PA and PAs from very large companies and PAs from very small companies. So you kind of get a good cross section of information on how
Yeah.
what everybody's doing, not only to market, but to deal with problem claims and different ways to look at policy language and things like that.
Yeah. Definitely. So tell me about some. I know you kind of mentioned this before the call. Tell me about some kind of claim that you're working on right now, where you're having some difficulty, or just kind of the normal day to
Hmm.
day struggles that are going on.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to take a step back and think, because I remember when I first started as a PA, I think a lot of new PAs do that. They consider it kind of a battle.
Yeah.
And I hear this from a lot of IAs and desk adjusters. They ask me if I know a certain PA, and they're like, God, he's very problematic to deal with. He just wants to argue all the time.
Right.
And I think we need to take a look at it like, the person we're dealing with is at the bottom, and it doesn't. They have really no authority.
Oh,
Well,
right. In the insurance company.
yeah, or
Right.
the IA or that desk adjuster, you know,
Yep.
they have to sell to their supervisor. So I always take a look at it now as a standpoint. Hey, let me help you sell this to your supervisor. What do they need? What information? Is there something we can do to help get this through? And I find that works a lot better than getting down into that, back and forth, arguing back and forth and
Right.
name
Kind of
calling.
like where it's adversarial.
Yeah,
It's just kind of
exactly.
like you're just two opponents slugging it out, and as opposed to,
Yeah,
I like this. From another person on another podcast, he said claims tribe. He calls them all like we're all part of the same tribe, and I really like that analogy because it kind of really helps frame the whole conversation. If you think about it in the sense that we're all working together to try to get a family back into their home.
right,
If you really, you got all these different companies and personalities, all this different stuff, but at the end of the day, you're all people, and we're all, working professionals, and we're all trying to get them back into their home. And
exactly.
if you kind of have that approach as opposed to, like you said, like an adversarial approach where you're kind of butting heads against them, then you don't get anywhere with that.
Right. You don't know the guy on the other side. He might have 50 active claims. He's just barely able to stay above water with what he's doing.
That
And
happens.
so if you can help him take some load off of his plate, he's going to
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, some of those guys are really stressed out, like you're saying. They're dealing with so much different stuff. They're just bosses gave them all these claims. There's no way they can even handle it all. They're
Exactly.
just doing the best they can.
Right. And like I think the claim I was talking about before, this has been going on for a while. Um, it's an insured. They own a bunch of multifamily across the states. Um, we had a water loss, sprinkler break, and this is a assisted living kind of retirement community. So they had to take all these people, put them
Right.
someplace else. They had to take all of their contents out so they could fix this. Well, now the carrier's coming back saying, I don't owe for their contents. And then, we get into
Oh,
a
wow.
word game. I'm like, I'm not asking you to pay for the contents, but you have to move them out and store them so we can get the work done. And
Right.
they're like, no, we don't. And then, lo and behold, I've got 5 other claims on this exact same policy for water losses where they paid for it. And they come back and say, well, I don't care if they did those wrong. That has no effect on
Wow.
how I handle this claim. You try to go back and forth and you say, try to get them to see, that doesn't play very well to an audience if you're going to say, you paid for it here, you're not paying for it here. Why is that?
Right.
Um, and they understand and they're looking for an out. So at the end of the day, I said, well, obviously you owe for some contents move and storage. Let's see what you can come up with. And if you can make it work for the insured, we're good. Excuse me.
So that's commercial claims. And it sounds like so they wouldn't have like the ALE or loss of use. They wouldn't have any coverage like that where they would
No,
cover for all their personal objects. They would that's not covered.
right. And we're not asking for, well, actually, they did pay to put these people up in,
Oh,
hotels for 4 months while they did this.
wow.
So it's kind of interesting. You go back and forth, and the adjuster that I'm dealing with right now, she was pleasant enough. She was pretty adamant, but I think by the time you walk through the conversation and you say, try to bring out issues like nowhere in their estimate did they have uh, any line items for content manipulation, content move out and reset. And she said, well, we don't owe for that. I said, you do owe for things uh, the apartment complex owns: cabinets, washers, dryers, dishwashers, water heaters.
Right.
She said, yeah, we do owe for that. I said, but you didn't include it. So they're going to go back and try to work it. It's a stair step process at this time. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to keep her from drawing a line in the sand and trying to push it into to a legal realm.
Yeah, because that's no good for anybody then, right? I mean, if it all goes to court, then it's just drawn out, takes
No,
forever to
and
finish it.
at the end of the day, we're only talking about an additional 150. So yeah, it's we know how that would work in court. Nobody's comes out ahead at that point.
The lawyers do. Lawyers, they come out way ahead. They're doing great off that. It's great for them, but it's
Well,
not good for anybody else.
not good for anybody else, and and sometimes a lot of the lawyers I deal with, I don't think they really like spending the time on that, knowing at the end of the day that
Hmm.
the insured won't be. But sometimes you have to, and I think that's one of the things where, again, you get into the legal aspect now that you bring it up. I think we all want to cultivate a relationship with a handful of attorneys because they are necessary sometimes, and sometimes you rely on them to help answer some questions. So you need somebody that's there and has a good track record and is willing to reach out and help when you need it.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. Yeah, having somebody like you said, like is really knowledgeable and can is accessible as well.
Yeah,
You
I
can reach
mean,
out and ask them for
being here in
help.
Oklahoma, I'm sure there's a handful here in Oklahoma that are really good. Come to mind. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We have attorneys as well. We try not to try not to get sued or suing people. That's never good either way. But it's always good to have somebody knowledgeable on your side that you can say, hey, what do we do on this kind of situation? Where's the line drawn in this?
yeah,
Because that's most of the time what we're doing is just asking for advice. Saying, hey, what would you do in this situation? How can I handle this? And it's usually done via email or phone call, and that's it. It's over.
oh yeah, exactly. Somebody's got a good paralegal that can look up some case law for you if you're having trouble finding it. So that helps.
Yep.
So how did you get involved in becoming a PA?
Oh, I'm not a PA. We provide temporary housing. So we're Premier
Oh,
Insurance
wait a
Housing.
minute.
So
That's
we
right.
provide
Yeah.
exactly like your type of situation there, where you've got all these families that are being dislocated, temporarily while the water damage is being repaired. That's exactly what we do. We'll go in there and we'll house them in hotels or apartments, whatever they need to and until they can get back into their house or apartment in this situation. So
Yeah. Do you
we
find
do that and we do it
do you
all
find
over.
uh, do you find the insurance carriers really come in and push their preferred vendor and try to get the insured?
Some do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It all depends on the carrier. You've got all these different kinds of personalities and everything else as well involved. Some really get frustrated and refuse to work with you because you're not their preferred vendor. And then you're like, wait a minute. Yeah, at the end of the day, you got to think about, hey, look, we got to get that family taken care of. I don't care about your preferred or anything else. They're not doing the job for whatever reason, or they would have already been taken care of. We're here. We can do it now, today. We'll get them in there. So yeah, that happens on occasion, but for the most part, people are reasonable. It's just some companies. Let me just say that some companies in particular are very difficult to work with. I'm sure that you know that there's certain carriers out there that are more difficult than others. Some are great, amazing companies that you're just like, wow. I'm just so blown away by some of these companies and what they'll do.
Yeah.
It's just like there's no limit to what they would do for their insured,
So
and then others that are quite the opposite.
yeah. So in your realm, then dealing with these people that have had the fire or the water loss and trying to find them um, additional living resources. Um, I know a lot of times that can be, you know, the carrier wants to come in and they want obviously to reduce that cost to them as much as
Right.
possible.
Yep.
But I
Yep.
think one thing that your clients need to realize is, well, first and foremost, take a look at their policy, make sure they've got enough money in
Yeah.
there to handle their contents and their additional living expenses, because sometimes that gets to be a little bit of an issue, especially if they're shopping price.
Well, that brings up a really interesting point, is that there's a lot of people that don't know what's in their policy.
Uh,
Just flat out bar none, they do not know what's in their policy.
90% of
They have
people,
no idea.
yeah, 90% of people. Right.
Yeah, so they don't know what the hell ALE means. They don't know what loss of use or any of these terms mean, and they don't know how this affects their livelihood. Like, hey, after a loss, what do I do? And we've ran into some, not all by any means, but some people who think this is like winning the lottery. They're like, yeah, I'm done. I'm done working. I'm just going to live it up in a 5-star or 6-star resort in Washington D.C. And you're like, no, no, that money is going to run out. You have a limit to how much money you can spend, and they're staying in $1,000 a night hotel, and you're like, that's not going to last.
No, that's
Sure
not the
enough, it
last.
doesn't last.
No, well, and I think one of the things we all need to be let these people know, especially on a fire, it might be 12 to 18 months before you're back into that
Yeah,
house. You need to, and you only have a certain amount of additional living expense,
that's right.
so you need to plan accordingly. Um,
Yeah,
and I find
that's another.
I find the adjusters a lot of times are willing to work with you. I know a lot of times they're limited.
Mhm.
They say, we can approve 6 months. Uh, Most of the time, you sit down and explain to them, I've never seen anything get rebuilt in 6 months of this
Right,
magnitude,
right.
especially today with the constraints on labor and materials.
Yep.
So try to sit down with him and work with him and say, you know, let's at least do 12. Let's plan on 18. Let's try to get them into something, because they might have children. They've got to probably want to keep them in the same school district. So finding a rental home that's comparable to what they were in, that might be an
Right.
issue. And you might really have to spend a little bit more. They might have to. Or they
That
might have to
that that
sign a
happens.
longer lease. We find that a lot of times. They only pay for 6 months, but you got to sign a 12-month lease to get these homes. So,
Yep. That's what we deal with all the time, and it's not so bad, in Oklahoma or in other states like that. But right now we're dealing with a lot in Florida, and Florida is really bad because their ALE was written and their policies were written years and years ago when everything was much cheaper,
right.
and so your ALE was $43,000, $65,000, or whatever it is, and now all of a sudden to get a property that was back in the day, a handful of years ago, $3,000 or $5,000 a month for a fully furnished house. Now you're looking at like $10,000, twelve thousand
Oh my gosh,
dollars.
yeah.
It's gone up that much, and sometimes seen $20,000 and $30,000 in Florida. Um, and so then your ALE doesn't last at all. So you're looking like a handful of months. The money's gone. All the money's gone, and these people are struggling. They're
Yeah,
living
I think
on sofas.
exactly. And I think if I was in a position like that myself, I would probably I'd go to the homeowner and say, "Do you have any relatives?
Yeah,
Do you have any friends? We can probably work something out where they can rent you space in their home to stay.
right.
But it better be somebody that you like, and they better like you because 6 to 12 months in somebody's house, things
Yeah,
can get a little tense. So,
yeah, it gets old after a while,
but
but
yeah,
yeah, there's
I think that's one
everything's
of the,
changing a lot.
and I think that's one of the things is we come in like you said. Sometimes the policy's not as good as you'd hoped it would be, so you've got to get a little creative and find solutions around the obstacles you've got, and try to help them out the best you can. And I think that's one of the things with us, especially when it comes to ALE. When we come in and we'll do a fire or something, if we can just step in and arrange the ALE, because we get paid a percentage of the money we recover. Um, so we'll work off the getting the structure rebuilt and taken care of. But when it comes to ALE, a lot of times we'll just say that we're not going to take a fee on that because you really need that to live. So you just
Yeah,
go ahead and we'll help you find a place, and then it's pretty much on autopilot after that. We don't really have to get involved. So all of our arguing will be on structure and rebuild and things like that.
trying to get it all done right though as well. And like you're saying, things are taking a lot longer. So in the past, where you could get a house rebuilt, I wouldn't say in 6 months, but you could get it done in 8 to 10 months. Now you're looking at 18 months or something like that.
Mhm.
We've seen that. We've had several that last that long as well. And yeah, you're stretching everything, every penny out to the last minute to get it to last,
Right.
as long as you possibly can.
And a lot of that's going to depend on the carrier. Some carriers they might spend 2 or 3 months on the front end trying to nail down the actual cost, demo, rebuild cost. So they might
Right.
spend 2 or 3 months negotiating back and forth. So you're already 90 days in before you even start. So that's a problem.
Yeah, it happens.
Yep.
Yeah. So tell me about that side of it. Tell me, you get to see a whole different side than I do. You deal with commercial claims, so tell me about all the rebuild parts and estimates and all these different things like that. How does that all
Well,
play into it?
so let's just say it's an apartment complex fire. Um, you're going to come in. You've got all of these tenants. All of a sudden, you've got to get them moved. Maybe they've got their own insurance on their personal property. So you've got to spend a little time making sure that they've got their property out and inventory. And then you can get in with the adjuster for the property. And then you're going to work on developing, what's the extent of the fire damage? What's the extent of the smoke damage? What's the extent of the water damage? And that might require bringing in some industrial hygienists or some structural engineers. So all of that
Hmm,
just builds time into the whole process. At that
right.
point, you're working, you're going to have your industrial hygienist. They might bring theirs in. It'll be some back and forth about the extent of what has to be cleaned, what needs to be thrown away. At that point, you're stripping everything out. Now, what's it going to take to build it back? And at that point, we're looking at, is there building codes that are going to come into play? Do we have money in the policy to cover that? Or is that something the insured's going to have to pay for on their own?
Wow.
So then this whole time you're working with the contractor. The contractor might have different ideas, but at the end of the day, you get down, you've got an agreed to scope of loss with the insurance carrier. Then the work starts. Now that's where the fun begins because you've done the best you can to identify all the damages. But once the contractor starts to tear into it, maybe there's more, maybe there's less.
Oh, right.
So at that point, if it's something minor, usually the contractor will go ahead and deal with it and we'll submit it. If it's something major, work has to stop at that point. The adjuster's got to come back out, or their expert's got to come back out. They got to look at it. We have to decide, well, Are we going to fix this, and is it covered? Um, and then we just keep working that process until hopefully, like you said, if everything's lucky, 12 months, you're done. Um, now, I know I'm assuming you deal also with some commercial property,
Yeah, correct.
things like that. So, kind of like on the residential side with the additional living expenses, on the business side, you've got lost revenue. Um, their policy requires them to do whatever they can to minimize that lost revenue. Now, if it's a storefront, retail storefront, or an industrial plant making something, is it possible to find them another location to set
Exactly.
up and start working in? And that's kind of where you would be able to go find them and say, hey, I found another warehouse comparable size. It's a mile away. Let's get you set up over there and get you going while we
Yeah,
work on this. And those expenses are covered. So at that point, you're trying to keep them going because the most expensive thing they have to replace is their customer base.
right.
And if you can
Yep. Yeah, and we do that as well.
yeah, if you can keep your customer happy and keep your product or whatever it is you're selling going to your customer, then you won't lose them because you'll if you lose them to get them back, it costs more to get a client back after you've lost them.
That's right.
So in your line of work, I'm sure that comes into play a lot. Um,
Yeah,
and that would be somebody we would rely on, because if we had a client that needed to move, set up temporary space, we'd call you and say, I've got a client. He had a retail storefront. He needs something
right.
in the same area. What can you do?
Yeah.
So,
And we've done those. We've done that where we can go out there and look for another retail storefront and find them another suitable location. It's very similar in nature. It's kind of like you said, loss of use or loss of revenue, as you want to find it as quickly as possible. You want to have that continuity in business. You don't want to have any shutdown as much as you can eliminate or reduce that. Then you can. That's a lot better for business all the way around.
yeah, it is. And I think, you know, in our line of work, the ALE companies, such as yourself, are invaluable to us because we don't have the contacts in the real estate world.
Right.
I don't know who's got industrial or warehouse space available or who's, I need a 4,500 square foot home with 3 baths and 4 bedrooms. I,
Yeah.
I don't know who to call. And,
Yeah.
and that has to happen quickly. So if anything happens, we're calling somebody like you saying, I need it. I need it this week. So,
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It seems simple. It's really simple in nature what we do. It's nothing terribly complex, and we try to use technology as much as we can. But at the end of the day, it's still a people business. You still have to talk to people and interact with people. No matter what, you have all these different websites and all these different things that can facilitate and help things out, but you still have to verify if, hey, that's still there. Is it still available? You have to do all that in person. So it's still a very much so a people business
right.
in what we do. And
So, what are some of the issues your clients are seeing with their insurance claims?
oh, we have there's problems all the time. There's things with not enough money in the policy. And it won't cover for everything. That's probably one of the biggest ones. There's also a big disconnect between. I think you kind of alluded to that earlier. With what the insurance carrier wants, which is try to keep the cost as low as possible. And sometimes they go to extremes. It's kind of like being or right now we've got one in San Jose, and you're talking about them trying to keep the limits to $5,000 or $6,000. You're like, that's totally unrealistic. You can't do that. It's a lot more money just to get anything there. And then you've got to balance that with sometimes, not all the times, but you got the insured that's they're looking for you know, there as a vacation. I actually had one lady actually said that. She's like, well, you know, I had this happen, so I want to make the best of it. I want to turn this into a vacation. You're like, it's not a vacation. There's nothing said about this fire, this incident that happened to you is all of a sudden a vacation. You can't kind of commingling these two things. And that's exactly what she was trying to do. She was trying to get a place on the beach. And you're like, no, no, your property's 5 miles from the beach and it's totally different. The costs are just astronomical to get anything even close to a beach, much less in California. It's just crazy. So yeah, we deal with. It's kind of like bringing both sides to reality, and I think public adjusters deal with that a lot. You're trying to get both parties to come together and meet on this one part. We're saying, hey, look, we can't get this much money or we can't get this, but here's what we can do. Here's kind of reality check.
Correct.
I've heard a lot about public adjusters who are, I've heard about this where they are writing these estimates that are just outlandish. If the repairs cost $25,000 or maybe $150,000, they're going in there and 10xing that. Asking for $1 million or more whenever they know it
Right.
doesn't cost that much. And then you've got the opposite side of that with the insurance companies where they're trying to lowball things as much
Right.
as possible.
Well, I
So
think
same concepts.
when we come in, we're trying to look at something from the perspective of the construction side of it, obviously, on a rebuild. Um, and there's never one right answer for any claim. It's kind of a range. So you need to sit down and you need to set expectations for everybody, and you need to let the carrier know. One of the best things you can do, um, you or anybody else working the carrier, is sit down and have an honest conversation in the beginning to set reserves. Because if they set those reserves too low, it's really painful for that adjuster to come back later and go to his boss and say, "Yeah, I need to double the reserves on this. I was completely wrong." So if you can help him set that reserve number to more accurate range in the beginning, you'll find it's a lot easier um, as you go along. As that cost keeps increasing, it's a lot easier for him to deal with that and present that to
Hmm.
his supervisor. So
So what? Just to ask you a stupid question here, but what are the reserves? Can you explain that?
okay, so if say you have a fire in your house and the carrier is required to set reserves and set aside money uh, for this loss. If they set it too low or they set it too high, that doesn't play well from an accounting standpoint, and the state regulatory
Hmm.
bodies don't like that either.
Ah,
So
okay.
let's say I've got a loss here, and it's $100,000, but the carrier sets it at 50. Well, now they have to come back and explain to the state. They have to explain to the supervisor, well, how were you so far off? Or if they set it at 200 and it only comes in at 100, same scenario. So if they say we need to set aside $100,000 for this loss, and they come in and it's 90,000, then they've done a good job of
Right.
managing their cash flow and managing their money and setting expectations for everybody. So yeah, every loss has a reserve set, and if you are dealing with somebody that knows what they're doing and can honestly take a look at it, they'll set the reserves appropriately, and then nobody's surprised when you get a little farther into the claim. Kind of
Right.
like
No,
with
I think that's
with your ALE, they say, oh, we want to pay for 6 months. You can say, okay, that's $3,000 a month, 6 months, 18 grand, but I can't get a 6 month lease. I have to have a 12-month lease. So why don't
right.
you set the reserves for 36,000? And if we can get it done before then, great. If we can't, then at least it's not something you've got to go back and tell your supervisor, hey, they told me it was going to be 12 months, but I only set it for 6. So
Right. Wow. So okay, so that's what it is. And I would imagine that's done by actuaries or someone of the nature within the insurance carrier. They're actually going in and setting up what that reserve is, saying like, okay, we need to set aside X number of dollars for these type of claims,
Mhm.
and
Well,
they need to be relatively accurate.
yeah, yeah.
Sounds
It's
like.
what it'll usually be, unless it's a very very large claim. It'll usually be the adjuster that's working the claim.
Ah, okay.
You know, they'll ask him to set a reserve number. What do you think this claim is going to cost us?
Ah, okay.
So hopefully you get one who knows what he's doing and has been doing it a while, and get some input from the contractor and from your PA, and kind of narrow that number down. If you've been doing it
Got
for a
it.
while, I'm sure like you walk into something, you take a look at it, and you kind of have a gut feeling. You can kind of look at it and know, this is going to be $200,000 or 250.
Right.
So
Huh. How often do you have problems whenever, let's say and especially with the commercial claims as well, where they don't have enough coverage or the right type of coverage, or different kinds of problems like that?
that's pretty common. The,
Uh,
the the most common issues with commercial policies are what they call a co-insurance. Um, let's
okay.
say you've got a $1 million building, but you don't want to buy $1 million worth of insurance. So basically, you're going to underinsure your building. So they have what they call co-insurance. It's an 80/20. And they say, okay, we will sell you this amount of, you know, this amount of insurance, but whatever dollar amount of insurance you were wanting to buy, you have to be within, you know, that 80 to 100%, that you've got to be 80% of the value to rebuild that property. So if the amount of insurance you bought only is worth 50 cents or 50% of the value to rebuild that building, then you incur a penalty.
Ah,
So say you buy 500,000, let's just say you buy $1 million worth of insurance, um, with an 80/20, but the building costs 1.5. Well, then there's a formula you go through, and they're going to take money back out of the claim because you underinsured it. So that's one of our biggest hurdles. We
why would they do that? Just to save money on the premiums?
try exactly. Yeah. And there's ways around that. You can
Okay.
buy what they call an agreed to value endorsement. So you can say, listen, I know I'm buying less insurance than my building's worth, but we're both going to agree the building is only worth $1 million. I know it's $1.5 million to rebuild it, but you're going to sell me $1 million worth of insurance,
Wow.
and we're going to agree that's all the building's worth. It costs a little bit.
Seems like self sabotage, though. I mean, like, I mean, if you never had a claim, then that's great. But knowing full and well that things happen all the time,
Yeah,
it would just be a matter of just trying to save premium, though.
exactly.
That's kind of their.
Hmm.
That's wow. That's asinine. That's crazy.
Well,
So
yeah, it
they're
happens a lot.
intentionally doing that.
Yeah. The other big hurdle we run into a lot is building code. I mean, let's say you've got a little strip mall, and something happens, and you've got just the basic $50,000 worth of building code upgrade. They come in and they say, oh, guess what? You now have to put a sprinkler system in this entire building. That's five hundred
Right.
thousand dollars.
Right.
Okay, so where are you going to come up with the other 450? So plumbing issues, wiring issues, insulation issues, all of these building code issues on an old building can really add up. And if you don't make sure you've got a building code coverage to anticipate these type of large outlays, cash outlays during a loss, you can be in a problem where you're having to run to the bank to borrow $400,000 or $500,000 to cover this, or writing a check out of your own bank account.
Wow. Okay. So a lot of problems. Sounds like that's uh That's really interesting. So it sounds like it's even worse than the residential side. I never heard of that, where they actually are intentionally underinsuring themselves and knowing full well what they're doing just to try to save money on
Yeah,
premiums.
you don't really see that issue so much on the residential side,
Right.
but I
Right.
think on the
It's pretty much
residential side,
regulated. You're going to have to insure it.
what you usually see is once again building code. They
Hmm.
don't have enough for any code upgrades because it doesn't take long to eat up $50,000, or on residential it could even be substantially less. It could be $5,000 in building code. Um, and then, like I said, the ALE, man, if they do not have enough ALE, that gets to be a real problem because I know your house is burned down. You want to get it fixed, but right now I've got to find a place for my wife and kids to live. I
Right.
only have this amount of money, but I need substantially more than that. So what am I going to do? That becomes a
Yeah.
problem. I think those are the two things: building code and ALE on a residential policy. If they watch those, they should be good. Personal property is usually not an issue. That's usually a percentage, like 50% of whatever the structure is goes toward uh, personal property. So if it's $100,000 policy for the building, they usually have $50,000 for personal property.
Wow.
Um, would say though that people need to go through and do some type of inventory yearly,
Right.
by every couple of years, something. Even if it's just walking through with and doing a video, open drawers, get pictures of everything, and store that someplace safe. Because after some kind of catastrophe, it's really hard to remember what you had.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And then people are so distressed usually after the incident, after the fire, whatever it is, or hurricane. That's the last thing on their mind is thinking about all the valuables that they had. A lot of times they just flat out forget about that. That's just left off entirely.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a very time consuming process. But uh, nobody likes to go through and make a list of everything they have. So that's why I say the video works out pretty well. At least it'll jog your memory when you're sitting down having to do the list. So
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Huh. So okay, so no, I'm just thinking about the commercial claim side though. With all these different problems that you guys see and have, especially like you're saying, like an older building, you may have just let's say a relatively small fire, but whenever you have that fire, now the city gets called out to do an inspection and says, "Oh, what, this building is not up to code, and you guys need to put in a $500,000 sprinkler system on this," and they're going to have to come out of pocket for that
yeah,
because the carrier wouldn't cover that, correct?
no, I mean if they don't, the carrier will cover whatever they've got for building code upgrade, and that gets to be an issue. Even on, it doesn't take long to eat up on a very large commercial building. It doesn't take long to eat up $500,000 or in building code upgrade.
Right.
Especially on if you had a fire and you were redoing the roofing system and they didn't have insulation on the roof, and you're having to add, enough ISO insulation to bring it up to code, that could be a couple $100,000 all by itself. And then we're
Wow.
not even talking about the sprinklers or the wiring or anything else that may or may not be up to code. So,
Huh.
yep.
So, where do you want to go after this, William? Where is your future aspirations? Where are you moving towards?
Well, I want to continue to keep doing this. It's the industry keeps changing. Like you said,
Yep.
technology is bringing a lot of tools to the table to make the investigation and the estimating process a lot easier. So I think most PAs, they're in this for the long term, are finding that education, understanding how policies change and policy language and what case law is saying, and different negotiation techniques, things like that. I think that's kind of where it comes down to the interpersonal, growing on that interpersonal level, so you can negotiate with these carriers, so you understand where they're coming from and what they're looking at on their side of the fence, because they're reading the
Right.
same case law, they're reading the same policies, and a policy is written by a lawyer, so we all know that the language can be interpreted a couple of different ways. So you got to find ways to kind of dig through that and make your point. But
Huh. Yeah, you're right. Because at the end of the day, you're all reading the same thing. It's still the same precedents, but it's just a matter of how you interpret all that kind of stuff. So
Yep.
that's really interesting to me.
Yep. So I don't, and I think industries like yours and industries like ours, um, I think as we move forward, finding venues where we can get together and kind of share experiences and share that knowledge back and forth and figure out ways where we can help each other.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of clients that I tell them, before you do anything, just give me a call. A phone call, 5 minutes on the phone can save you a lot of headache. So,
Oh, right.
you know,
But you meant before they actually file the claim, or when?
yeah, if it's, well, obviously if it's a fire, you need to be calling right away. But before they get
Right.
too far into the claim, call, let me talk to you, kind of figure out what kind of policy you've got, what obstacles may or may not be in front of you, and help you navigate those, and help you prepare,
Mhm.
because you're going to have to talk to that adjuster. You're going to have certain documents ready. And I can tell you what you need to get ready because I know exactly what he's going to ask for. And I know the questions he's going to ask. So
Oh,
it kind of helps calm people down too, because if you know what you're going into, it helps. If
right.
there are things that they don't have, I can tell them, you need to make a call. You need to go get this. Maybe you need to call CPA real quick. Maybe you need to call Caleb. The more
Mhm.
work you can do on the front end before that adjuster shows up, the more of his work you've done for him, the smoother the process will be for you. So,
Right. And a lot of times, from what I've understand and experienced, is the public adjuster is not called first. They're called sometimes months afterwards, after they've experiencing problems. Then they call the public adjuster,
yeah,
and it's kind of like you're playing catch up.
yeah, and you know, that's always a problem, because now I might have 6 months worth of mistakes to try
Right.
to try to unravel, and try to undo. Obviously, that's a more work. Obviously, we charge a higher fee when we have to come in on the back end and clean something up.
Hmm.
So that's why I say call us on the front end. Even if you don't hire us, just 5 minutes on the phone with you on the front end will really help prevent you from making those mistakes. So that if you do call us later, hopefully those mistakes were not made, and it'll be a lot easier for us, and we don't have to charge a higher rate.
Right. Wow. So I didn't think about that perspective. Is that because they will screw things up? There's going to be different errors made along the way, and though that will actually cost them money to actually have to go back and straighten that out.
Yeah, it will. I mean,
Wow.
people talk. You get into a
Yeah.
conversation with the adjuster, and it feels like it's just a regular conversation.
Right.
A lot of adjusters are there. They're trained to ask certain questions. It's, I hate to say it, but it's might be almost like an interrogation a little bit. They're probing, they're
Right.
looking for answers, and if they can get a certain answer, then they might save money because they might say, "Oh, we don't have to pay for that because you said this or you said that."
Oh, I see. I see. Wow. So they okay self sabotaging themselves
Yeah,
once
they're
again.
innocent mistakes, and some people might,
Right.
words can be taken different ways. So sometimes you have to just be a little careful about the language you're using.
A lot of people don't go through these type of events, but once every what 20 years, or even
Ever,
once in a
yeah,
lifetime, or ever. Yeah, so they're completely and utterly inexperienced. You deal with this on probably a regular basis, a regular weekly basis.
every
You
week.
know exactly what you're doing, exactly what to say, and just like you said as well, what to look for.
Yeah,
What type of documents they're looking for, everything else.
yeah. We, with this last round of freezes, we're doing a lot of hotel freezes because a lot of hotels have sprinkler systems where the main line runs in an attic and it's not insulated. So
Ah,
they're in areas where they're not used to this type of freezing weather, and it would just completely destroy it. Well, they're thinking, well, we'll just come in, clean up the water, patch some drywall, and we're coming in and saying, well, wait a minute, it's a lot more extensive than you think. And we're not,
Water damage always is, right?
yeah,
Always is a lot of damage.
especially out of a sprinkler system, people don't realize water in a sprinkler system is not like water out of your tap. It is not clean. It's considered like a class three contaminant. So anything it touches has to be
Wow.
removed.
I didn't know that even.
Um,
Wow.
and it's not good stuff. Um, so we walked into these hotels and they're just thinking they're going to kind of they'll be back in business and end of the month. We're like, no, you're going to have to pretty much gut this whole thing, and you're probably going to be not be back online for about 9 months. Just guessing. And we'll bring in and to prove our point because presenting a claim to an insurance carrier, I always relate it to getting ready for trial. You want to make sure you've all your documentation and then you've proved everything you're asking for. So we'll bring in an industrial hygienist and we'll have them do all the testing that needs to be done. And then we know for sure, okay, we need to take this out over here. We don't have to touch this. This is fine. And we can really do a much more accurate job of estimating what has to be torn out and what doesn't.
Wow. Sounds like you're worth your money. Definitely sounds
I
like a
think
good
so. Yeah, I
good
think
investment for people.
we think so. It's a lot of sorry, it's a lot of work. Sometimes it's a big headache, but all in all, at the end of the day, we think everybody's happier. We think you get a better result,
Right.
and if we're on the front end, we think it goes a lot quicker. One of these losses we were just on, the contractor was in there and he was wanting to, we'll just tear this out and replace it. We're like, you got to slow down. If that contractor would have done what he had wanted to do, I'm sure this summer when it got warm, we would have been back at that hotel and they would have said, it smells like we've got a lot of mold or something in this hotel. It
Yeah.
doesn't, it's something's not right. Well, yeah, because you didn't do a thorough investigation and figure out what your scope of work really needed to be to begin with. So,
Wow. Yeah. So doing a thorough job and actually, especially with mold, because I know about that, and it's like you're saying with water damage. I didn't know about this sprinkler system though. That it's a class three contaminant. That's crazy,
yeah, when it comes
but
out,
it makes sense.
you should have seen it. It looks like black sludge when it comes
Oh
out.
my gosh.
That water,
Wow.
it just sits there
Right.
and it just collects for years and years and years, collects contaminants. And there's oil and other chemicals and
Oh
rust
wow.
and stuff in it. So yeah, I mean,
So it's just a last resort, optional last resort. You're not turning that thing on just to cool the people down. You're there because that building is going to go down to, burn
yeah,
to the ground. So
I'd rather deal with a little water and a few rooms than fire through the whole building. So yeah,
right. Wow. Huh. That's interesting. William, it was great talking with you. I'd like to have you on again in the future, but
sure.
it's been a blast, and
Pick
I'm really impressed you're here in Oklahoma.
yeah, pick some topics you'd like to go into a little bit more depth. I don't know if any of your clients, if there's anything questions they have or anything they'd like to know a little bit more about, but you know, always happy to help.
You know what I find, to be honest, is really interesting about that is that people don't know what they don't know.
True.
People don't know that they need to know these type of things until after the fact, till
Yeah.
after it's too late. Then they need to know it.
Yeah, I do a lot of speaking to some. I've got a handful of clients that are property investment groups, and you would think, if you're investing, $300 or $400 into buying property, you would understand insurance, but most of them really don't know all these little ins and outs of insurance. They just think, oh, I bought it, I'm covered. And so we get into things
Right,
like that co-insurance and the code upgrade, and there's debris removal, all kinds of little things that they don't even think about. So,
right.
yeah. Okay.
Definitely adds up to the cost.
All right, Caleb. Well, thank you. Uh,
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And you're here in Oklahoma. I'll let you buy me lunch. So,
All right. Excellent. Thanks, William.
thank you. Bye bye.
Hi, this is Caleb Owens with Premier Insurance Housing. Do you need help with ALE or temporary housing for your policyholders or clients? If so, we would love to help out. We offer a wide range of services, and we offer our services nationwide. We offer mobile homes and fifth wheels to single-family homes and apartments. To request our services, just click the link in the description or give us a call, 405-604-0786. Thank you.